Good afternoon, everyone. If you are joining us for the State of the Data Nation session with Sir Nigel Shadbolt today, we're going to give about 2 minutes of time for everybody to be able to get onto the webinar because we know that sometimes there's a bit of a time lag. So please do join as you can, get set up. If you would like to, please introduce yourselves in the chat. It would be great to know where you're calling in from, where you're dialing in from. And also during the course of the webinar, Nigel and will be taking questions. Or we'll be taking questions at the end. So if you have a question for Nigel, if you could pop it in the chat. And you can't see them at the moment, but we've got Joe and David from the ODI team, and they're going to gather together all of those questions, and we'll ask as many as we have time for towards the end of the session. So yeah, if you're just joining us, just to let you know, I'm asking everybody to get yourselves set up. We're giving a little bit of time today because we know we've had a time lag in the past with people being able to join the webinar. So if you get logged in, get settled in, and we're going to start in about 1 minute's time, just to give everybody time to get on. And I just mentioned, if you've got any questions for Nigel, please pop them in. Oh, hi to 360 Giving, good friends of ours. Please do pop your questions in the chat. We'll get through as many of them as we can towards the end. Oh yeah, and do introduce yourselves in the chat function as well. Say who you are, where you're from. We always love to know. Hi Toronto, great to see you. Good to see UCL joining us there. Oh, Darjeeling's on the line. Hello, great tea. Hi to Milltown Partners. Okay, I think we're at about 2 minutes past the hour, so I'm just going to crack on a little bit further with some housekeeping information. So this webinar is being recorded. I just need to let everybody know, and it will be shared via our social media channels, on our newsletter, and it'll be archived on the website and also on YouTube. So you can come back to it at any time you like, but I just wanted to let you know that. And we might also use some quotes and extracts from this in future ODI communications. As I mentioned before, if you'd like to ask a question of Sir Nigel, please pop it in the chat and we'll get to as many of those as we possibly can. So the slide that you see before you is Data and AI Opportunities and Challenges 3 years on from ChatGPT. But the advertised title of the session is The State of the Data Nation. And this was a little bit of nostalgia on our part because those who remember the ODI Summit will remember that every year we would hold a session with Sir Tim and Sir Nigel on stage where we'd ask them to reflect on the year just gone by in the data ecosystem. So we're going to do a little bit of that today, but obviously Nigel is going to be focused very much on the specific technological changes that have taken place since the widespread advent of generative AI. So my name is Emma Thwaites. I'm one of the directors here at the ODI. My areas are corporate affairs and policy. I've been with the organisation since we opened our doors back in 2012. Of course, I'm delighted to welcome our co-founder and executive chair, Sir Nigel Shadbolt. He and Sir Tim founded the ODI in 2012. Nigel is one of the UK's foremost computer scientists. He's also one of the originators of the interdisciplinary field of web science and is a leading researcher in artificial intelligence. Nigel is Principal of Jesus College, Oxford, a Professor of Computer Science at the University of Oxford, and a Visiting Professor of Artificial Intelligence at the University of Southampton. And in May 2024, Nigel published As If Human, Ethics and Artificial Intelligence, which he co-wrote with one of our other board members here at the ODI, Roger Hampson. And that provides a new approach to the challenges surrounding AI. I highly recommend that book. It's an excellent read. Nigel's also a Fellow of the Royal Society and the Royal Academy of Engineering, and a Fellow and former President of the British Computer Society. Nigel was knighted in 2013 for services to science and engineering. and we're delighted to have him join us today. So Nigel's going to give us a wonderful presentation that some of us have sort of had a bit of a preview of. It looks really interesting. Then I will probably have a few questions for him myself, and then we'll go to questions from the floor. So Nigel, over to you.
Thanks very much, Emma, and it's great to be with everyone today. State of the nation, but in a sense, all of our worlds have been somewhat changed, challenged, transformed, disrupted by the emergence of AI. For myself, I've been working in the field of AI, some of you may know, for many years, 45 years plus now, and have seen many kind of summers and winters, but there's an extraordinary explosion of both capabilities, opportunities, and challenges. And I want to talk a little bit about that today, and that will lead us very naturally, I think, into questions around the data side of what AI can, could, or might become. It is just under 3 years since ChatGPT was released by OpenAI, just 3 years ago, and so much has changed since then. I'll try and advance my slides. There we go. Not least, I mean, who needs convincing? But just look at the extraordinary change in the search term AI, just almost exactly coinciding with that release. So we know it's on all of our collective minds, and it has actually not just been on our minds, but has actually changed the world in many ways, not least, of course, the world of science. I'll talk about that a little bit, but notably in recent Nobels, both the founders of the deep theory of modern machine learning, Hopfield, Hinton, and others, I should say, but those two in particular were accorded the Nobel Prize, in this case, in physics and for chemistry. The work that Demis Hassabis and John Jumper had done in the area of protein folding, an amazingly powerful demonstration of the application of modern machine learning to solve a decades-old challenge and begin to transform the area of structural biology, but not just structural biology. Many, many domains changed. Now, this is just a slide that illustrates the proliferation of models and types of models in the field. The particular innovation that ChatGPT represents was the widespread deployment of so-called transformer models, a style of deep neural network that has consumed vast amounts of content and on the way produced extraordinarily fluent output in terms of conversation, in terms of image generation, in terms of a whole range of apparent reasoning. We have seen in this world the explosion of models. I often think of it almost in terms of a biological analogy: speciation, specialization, all sorts of interesting variants of models. And these models vary. The ones we're familiar with, ChatGPT 5, the current OpenAI latest offering, very much based on a very large scale model. But there are along the way all sorts of variants. So Meta's original model, the Llama models, which have been more openly available in terms of the weights are open and available for download, that these individual models also act as sources of innovation. On the right-hand side of that diagram, you'll see just a range of different models that have speciated out, derived from that particular form. Models vary in terms of size. They vary in terms of whether they're more or less closed or open. And one thing we are noticing is that the relatively smaller, and I say relatively smaller models, seem to be getting really rather capable. They're getting smarter. And the question that is concerning a lot of researchers in the field of AI is, will scaling, will simply making the models larger and larger and larger, giving them more and more data, lead to continuous improvements? And there's a genuine difference of opinion in the field as to whether that will happen. Some people feel that we're maybe entering a degree of a ceiling effect, that the increases in capability have not been as great in recent releases as we had seen in the earlier phases, just those 3 years or so since ChatGPT was first released, but something we can discuss. There is a lot of innovation. The other thing that has changed is that these modern large foundation models, or these modern machine learning models, have moved from simply being generative, if you will, predictive, to the so-called agentic style of reasoning. So that not just simply as the original conversational ChatGPTs did, and others of their type, Bard and such like, not just passively responding to prompts, generating a particular output, operating with its own weights, but this agentic turn allows models to essentially pursue goals, to interact externally with websites, with application programming interfaces, with code, with databases. And the interesting challenge there is how this is changing the whole area of those challenges we have to deal with, from predictable and controllable models. The so-called alignment problem, which is how do we ensure that these models are actually beneficial? Do we understand how they behave? And if they're off pursuing goals to satisfy your ultimate objectives, do we know that they reliably repeat those execution paths? So here's a nice example of one of the challenges in modern AI, which is, whilst we've seen remarkable capability in both large language and agentic models, they've also demonstrated quite an extraordinary ability to deceive, to be misaligned, to be vulnerable. There, the slide on the left kind of shows you if you like, the imagined literary equivalent of the good agents, Andrew or Data in Star Trek, all the way through to slightly more questionable characterizations of what an agentic AI could look like. But this is kind of based on a understanding that as we look at deployments of some of these large commercial models, we see them displaying really quite capable behavior in areas where we might just give pause. So Meta Cicero, for example, can play the famous diplomacy game, which is all about your ability to strategically lie to achieve your ends, and indeed does quite a good job of playing that game. Or indeed examples where you can see systems which are able to effectively hack the reward they're being trained on and lead to so-called models of divergence. Don't intend to go through all these modes, but just to say, we do know that, and we're understanding more about how these models are susceptible. It's important we understand. So here's one example, so-called proxy misspecification. So when we're trying to train these models, we'll often try and optimize for something that we can observe that we actually hope correlates with our actual goal, or a human preference score, if you will. Agents in this world, artificial agents, can become expert in maximizing the proxy, even if it means violating the true goal. So you'll see this in so-called sycophancy, where the user is being told by these systems what they want to hear, not what is true, or finding loopholes in the reward function. So instead of cleaning a room, a simulated room, which you've got your simulated agent inhabiting, instead of actually cleaning it, simply deleting objects from it. Or indeed, possibly developing goals that the system has that override the intended objective. These are starting to manifest as real issues. The other problem we have, and we're aware of with these very large modern machine learning models, is sometimes called an interpretability crisis. So the very large numbers of weights that these systems represent are somewhat opaque to us. The internal workings are not easy to interrogate. So we can't trace all of the connections in these huge models. Sometimes the capabilities that emerge are not programmed, they emerge from training. We don't always know how those capabilities are actually grounded in the system. And if an agent can learn to appear aligned during testing when its internal reasoning remains misaligned, how do we deal with that? So these are the kind of challenges that people are facing in the world of modern machine learning. And how do we deal with that? There are a variety of attempts. It's not as if the field is static in this area. There's a whole discussion around AI safety, how we ensure that the system is aligned, that each stage in reasoning is correct. But these problems are persistent, and what we're looking to develop in what we're seeing, as well as the ODI role I play. I'm a professor at Oxford University, where my research group on human-centered computing and human-centered AI is trying to think about how we might develop formal methods for proving that these systems can operate within boundaries. Not easy. Can we actually devise tripwires or anomaly monitoring so we can see anomalous behavior should it arise? Can we run these systems in controlled environments to more thoroughly ascertain that they behave in ways that we wish? And indeed, in the UK, with the AI Security Institute, we have really leading edge work thinking about these challenges. But just to say, simply because a system appears to be reasoning in a way that we would think of as reasoning in a human-like way, that is not necessarily the case. So these systems can have problems in dealing with certain forms of reasoning. There is indeed a new set of tests being applied to uncover whether the systems are operating in actually a rule-based way, anything that corresponds to a rule-based way. So we are very aware as researchers of what the challenges are in this space. And I think as we think about their widespread deployment, there's an urgent need to constantly interrogate the state of the art here. Francois Jollet's work on the so-called ARC tests are a good example, abstract and reasoning corpus, where he's trying to move beyond if you like, the traditional Turing test for the adequacy of these models to understand just where are the strengths and weaknesses of these systems. Okay. We know that systems hallucinate. We know they sometimes have outdated facts, and we know they occasionally will fail in forms of inference. We also know that increasingly, as models are trained on AI-generated content, they are susceptible to artifact generation. We're seeing this in image generation, where images that have been machine generated that contain artifacts not in the original images or in the intended training images become slightly off kilter. You get a deterioration. I mean, in the extreme, if you feed generations of AI generated text into the large language models, you can see very serious degradation. And indeed, there is a concern here about how we then assure that the data that is being used to train systems in the future is assured and warranted to be fully representative of the range of data and not contain systematic errors. There's something I've talked about on a number of occasions, and I think we're beginning to see a real concern around this. Which brings us to the kind of main business and concerns of the ODI. We often talk the ODI about the desirability of data as infrastructure to understand its properties. But what does it mean to scale this into a world where that data is being then used to train machine learning models? And indeed, work that colleagues at the ODI, Eleanor Semple and her colleagues in particular, have been working on ways of flagging and annotating data in a way that more carefully assures its quality and its provenance. This is a Croissant, which is a metadata format for machine learning ready data sets. Holding data to high standards is the essential idea here. Now, when we look at what the discourse is around data in the age of AI, and this is some work again from the Global Data Observatory, Eleanor, again, Simple, very much involved in this, was looking at what is being talked about, what's of concern. And we know that issues around data protection, sharing, quality, and privacy are important. They're in the minds of people. But actually, when you look at details, issues around licensing, issues around transparency, the lineage of data, its original provenance seem to be less discussed. Now, this is a changing environment, but it's one of the reasons why we, in our work, about a year ago, released at the Open Data a set of intervention suggestions where we very much want the community to be thinking about a number of key challenges. The transparency around the data used to train models, that's an important feature for us because without knowing the detail of what was used, when and how, and to what extent, it's hard to assess the quality impacts. A second intervention, thinking about how we manage the absorption of this content into the models. There has been real concern, for example, you'd be aware, content creatives, traditional IP licensing, which many feel is under threat from the very large scale appropriation of content into these models. A third challenge is what about people's rights in the data supply chain? Do we understand how data is being used that relates to us as consumers or as citizens? How do we actually ensure that there really is broad access to data for training AI models in a controlled and transparent way? So it's one thing to demand it, but can we provide a framework within which that can happen sensibly? And what about our collective voices in all of this? We have to remember that the challenge in AI is not just that we can develop these capabilities, but they continue to enjoy public trust. So something that we care very much about at the ODI. So this cluster of policies have been developed with an eye to the developments I've just been referring to earlier on. And I'm going to stop there. That's about 15 minutes of me declaiming and go back to Emma.
Thank you so much,
Have I
Nigel.
stopped sharing? Let me
You
just
have.
see.
We can
Yes,
we can
good,
just
good.
see you. So that's fantastic. Thank you so much. We're getting some great questions from the audience. So I'm going to let the chat run for a little bit longer, and ask you a couple of questions of our own, if that's okay. So I was really interested if right back at the close to the beginning of the presentation when you talked about speciation and
Yes.
specialization and analogies always come to mind for me with these things. And I was just wondering, do you foresee a future where potentially AI will follow the pattern of human development, where one species and perhaps the most or the least expected species is the one that ultimately ends up being dominant over time?
That's a great question. I think that we can't know. I mean, it is very interesting. We've kind of locked into this view that might is right and quantity has its own quality. So these very, very super large models, and they are providing foundational elements to many of the services that are being provided. But we've seen this, have we not, in the disruption that was caused by the availability of, if you like, models with a Chinese orientation. Okay, so the models from Alibaba, Quen, models from DeepSeek. The challenge there is that these available models. So if you go to a site like Hugging Face, the go-to site for downloadable, openly available models, they're seeing some really remarkable stats around where models are being downloaded from, and a lot of them aren't from the big five platforms. Let's put it that way. So I think there will be speciation. It's too early to call it. It may well be. I mean, the point about speciation is that the object fits the niche to which it is adapted. Now, of course, there are these. The argument then goes, well, what about organisms like ourselves that have populated every kind of niche? Isn't that where we'll end up? But nevertheless, specific particularizations that are customized, for example, to particular areas of scientific discovery or particular areas of medical application, highly tuned, highly refined on data that relates to that sector. And that might actually come from a model out with the candidates with which we're all familiar. I think we're going to see that just happen. Too early to say what the winners will be. And of course, as we know, that things through the history of life have gone extinct, have led to other developments. Yeah, but I think it's quite an arresting analogy. Yeah.
So I've got another one for you, as you like analogies. We were talking last week about, I think you had Peter Dannenberg, who's the Google DeepMind chief engineer. I think you had him down at Jesus College, Oxford, giving a talk last week or the week after, and you mentioned a couple of the things that he said. One was a comment that related to this piece about AI being trained on AI generated data, and this idea that some of the models might be reaching the ceiling of their
Yeah.
capabilities. So I'd like you to comment a little bit more on that. And then the other one, which talk about arresting analogies. I love this one where you talked about the emerging, or he talked about the emerging um, salvage industry for pre-atomic steel. This is pre-atomic steel that exists mainly in shipwrecks and debris underneath the oceans, and how this
Yeah.
is harvesting this steel is growing into an enormous industry. And there was an analogy made between that and the sort of contamination of data that has been used to train Gen AI models. So I wonder if you could comment on those two thoughts.
Well, I mean, I was very interested. I mean, Peter Dernberg, I mean, outstanding and leading software engineer, very much involved in development of Google's models, Bard and Gemini. And he was, really very interesting sort of comments. I think and people in the industry, absolutely do understand the challenges here. So his sense of the uh, the importance of information that you can trust and assure could become more important. So the large scale generation of content out there, whose provenance we're not entirely sure about, will this in some sense, this noise drown out the signals that we care about? Which it takes us back to this whole idea of the atomic steel analogy, which has been, it's not original, but it's a very interesting idea that there are very particular applications where you want to be assured there is no radioisotope contamination of the steel that's been made. I mean, these applications exist. So would we value, in some sense, that pre-Gen AI nirvana? Of course, there's always been fake information on the web. It's not as if that's a new thing. It's much more about being assured that there haven't been errors in transmission commission. You're never going to have a completely pure information environment. It's too large, too diverse. What would that quite mean? But sure, I think the point was being made was to make better efforts to be clearer about the impact of, if you will, contaminated data sets, and how do we ensure that we might do more to identify origin and source. And certain sorts of machine generated data set are going to be just fine. They'll be highly valuable in and of their own right. They will have all sorts of qualities that we wish. But it is this large scale generation and unmarking of content in terms of its provenance that could become problematic.
And indeed, we have had questions about provenance. We've had questions about ethics coming through. Issues been reflected upon around, what the incentives are in the creative industries to continue producing original content. I'm going to come to those.
Hmm.
But I have one more question that I would like to ask you, which is sort of partially inspired. And for our international audience, it was announced this morning that the UK unemployment rate has reached 5%. Which is goes back to sort of pre or pandemic levels of unemployment in the UK in the UK labour market. And what I find interesting about this is some of the commentary this morning about that was not making a direct correlation, but saying that some of that might be down to
Hmm.
the increasing use of generative AI. In contrast with that, last week, McKinsey released some research which suggested that while 9 in 10 organisations are reporting some form of AI use, only a third of those have scaled it meaningfully. So I'm just wondering, like, are we seeing employers perhaps not recruiting at the same level as maybe they would have done pre-generative AI based on the promise rather than the reality of generative AI? Is there an effect taking place in your view?
I mean, I think you'd need to look at reliable data on this and whether reliable data exists at scale on this. I think there are lots of opinions. Clearly, in some sense, the unemployment rates, the unemployment rates. I mean, people have certainly said they see in specific companies, of course, quite large scale layoffs. There have been talk that that's down to efficiencies afforded them by AI, often in the platform companies themselves, which is interesting. There is talk of a freezing, a hiring chill or freeze. People are not so quick, not taking on interns, apprentices of various sorts. There's also quite a significant pushback that I'm hearing is people saying, look, if that really does happen, you will whether or not these productivity gains emerge, and perhaps it's too early to say in some contexts. Um, the decisions not to backfill parts of your kind of worker demographic with new hires could be really problematic, not least because there will be numbers of workers in your workforce who have not done, if you like, the deeper training in their profession or their craft that's required to then move on to advance. So it is a very complicated set of discussions around this space. I still think it's a bit early to confidently assert there will be, this increase in unemployment is down to AI. There are lots of other headwinds that are around, as we know. Unconfounding those issues can be a challenge. I've tended to be on the side of those who are more optimistic about societies responding and finding lots of paid work. Societies and economies responding and finding lots of reasons to employ people to do paid work of types that we haven't necessarily thought about yet. And some of it may be involved in assuring and overseeing the quality of data used by our AI systems, for example.
Excellent. Thank you, Nigel. I'm going to kind of stay with a similar theme, and because we've had so many questions, I'm going to group them. And I'm going to start with Aid. You actually asked the first question, Aid. I am going to ask your question of Nigel, but I'm going to keep Aid's question to the end. So I'm going to go first of all with Marion and Laura. Marion asks, in addition to the pragmatic risk you raise of AI becoming self-cannibalizing and consuming inaccurate generated data in its training, how can we mitigate the risk of AI destroying the economic incentives for humans to generate content
Mm,
online for further training? So I guess that is to do with, sort of human productivity,
yeah.
humans as kind of agents in the loop. And then Laura asks, is there an obligation for private companies to inform people when they're using AI? Is it possible to mitigate bias in data sets before they're used in training? And what are the risks? That's lots of questions. What are the risks in opening up public data sets? So I think, there's this question about how do we make sure that we're always replenishing the human generated data for training? And then, what obligations or regulations or assurances should private sector companies be obligated to meet when they're using AI, and can they mitigate the biases, I guess, in data sets before they're used in training?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there is a sense in which the part of the answer to the challenge of potential deterioration of AI models eating their own stuff is human generated content. Where are you going to get it when most of what has been generated in the open public web has been consumed? Does it then become a matter of encouraging and indeed incentivizing real content creation? Of course, we're now moving to a world in where that notion of content creation is already entangled with our AI generation systems, and we face this challenge in our education system: is how do
Mm.
we know that the essay has been produced? What characteristics are we looking for when we look at this blend between the human content generator and the machine generated content? I mean, what we know about the nature of these fundamental algorithms behind the modern machine learning methods is that they essentially are huge compression algorithms that then learn to anticipate and predict on the basis of what's been trained on, to really retain fresh and novel and distinctive material, is in some sense a very high level quality that embodied individual human minds have, that these systems do not have at this point. So there could well become, and I do worry worry the extractive industry that looking for good new fresh data might require, kind of require people to be paid for their content. Now we the whole IP regime at the moment is somewhat on being challenged by the way in which data is being appropriated. And there is a real debate to be had on how you do align those incentives. Don't have the answers to all of that, but simply to say, well, it's it's a new world, get over it, is a massive transfer of content value into particular platforms.
I'm
That's
going to,
that's one part of the question.
yes,
The other part was, uh, yeah, um, what is the danger? How can we protect against this? What do we do about the data sets that have been well, for example, generated, the ones we care about, they've been generated at the taxpayer's expense at the Open Data Institute, high quality. Of course, those sorts of data sets are very much in view. The open data, well, a part of our argument has been is that high quality public data sets should be a foundation stone for AI training. We're not going to kind of say suddenly, well, you put the paywalls up around that. But other types of data that has shared characteristics where there are notions of stewardship around privacy and personal information, we've got to be really thoughtful about that, and not simply assume that that can all be interred. And indeed, the deployed models we see from the platforms, at a certain level of service provision, if you're revealing data that relates to your workforce, yourself, that data, you can set the system up. If you've got the right kind of licenses in place to say that will not go into training, that will not leave if you like, the business ecosystem or the organizational ecosystem you're working in. But a lot of work to do in this space, which is why our principles, I think, are so important.
excellent, thank you. So this is a related theme, but slightly different. And it's about the role of the sort of cultural and heritage sectors. So Victoria says many of the lesser discussed concerns you touched on, like provenance, are bread and butter concerns for librarians, archivists, curators, guess, and other cultural heritage and memory professionals. Can you say more on the role of cultural heritage institutions, which I know you care deeply about in this work, in practical or policy terms? What is their role in this?
Well, their role is, I mean, cultural heritage is one of those areas, always been very early adopters in the use of everything from semantic technologies to metadata to curating data as assets. And the challenge has been, of course, in those contexts is what to do with the value of that content. Is it something that you license to you? And different organizations respond to this in different ways. The notion that a lot of cultural heritage organizations have is that this is, in some sense, a public good. Uh, we are the custodians of the quality and provenance of that data and the origin story behind it, and that seems to the good. That seems to be to the good. I guess the problem is with all of this appropriation of public good, are we confident that our very large scale actors and others using AI are, in some sense, paying back into the system that
Hmm.
keeps those organizations, those assets in good heart. And that is normally done through a taxation system that is fair and proportionate. Discuss.
Mm. Controversial, or maybe not.
Well, not
Um,
controversial. I mean, the question is, whether, I mean, the question is, what does reasonable cost of doing business look like when the business is the large scale use of content that has been created at the taxpayers'
yes.
expense? What's
Yeah.
and if you don't do it directly off the licensing, then do you do it off the profits that accrue in some sense by the deployment of that content?
Hmm. Hmm. Excellent, thank you. And we've got so many questions here, and
Yeah,
I,
we
I
have.
think we're not definitely not
Well,
going to
they're
get
already
through
a
them
valuable
all.
resource, and
They
perhaps
are
organize
hugely.
them and try and get some considered
Well, we
responses to
we
them.
can do that. I was going to suggest that we might do that, but I think we also need to ask you to come back, and
Yeah,
we will address some of these questions directly, because in an hour we can't possibly cover them all.
yeah.
And I'm keen to get to Siobhan's question because it's a very different type of question, and I want to make sure that I interpret it correctly because this feels to me like a question potentially about surveillance, but also a question about data. So she says, what happens with facial recognition and drone technology being brought together? She surmises that we'll see more mistakes, and I'm guessing that is in things like identifying um, potential felons or people who are up to no good. There could be errors made there. You could end up with people's details being held on databases that they haven't permissioned, and then being used in AI applications as well. So I just wonder if you have any observations on
Well, look,
that.
I mean, it's a fair point, but I mean, it's not a new problem in some sense. We've had this um, emerging right from the earliest days of the ability to take digital and biometrics and use them. Face recognition being a good example. The remedies that you can get, the kind of guardrails you put around that, are not so different than were being proposed decades ago, but the challenge is now pure scale and the ability to pay attention and notice if there has been appropriate or inappropriate retention. So our regulation, I mean, again, it doesn't always require an AI regulation to sort this out. We have existing
Mm,
regulation and laws in everything from the Civil Aviation Authority and what they allow you to do if you fly drones, and how you can use, photography or not. We've got a general data protection regulation in place that does apply to what you can retain and not. But it is about being confident that the laws we have on the books are being applied and can be applied at scale, because it's one thing to have the right, it's another to be able to kind of enforce it. And then there will certainly be a need for additional work to think about how you deal with a new and emerging challenge. I mean, one of the real challenges in facial biometrics, for example, is not just a case of misidentification, false positives and false negatives with real faces. It's the fact we now have absolutely indistinguishable synthetic faces, which can
mm,
lead to all sorts of challenges for law enforcement. So there is, I think, a need for much stronger enforcement of the expectation of appropriate behavior. And if you are found to be in violation of that, real and significant enforcement of essentially redress in terms of fines or I think we're often, again, the information committee, we have a lot of powers reserved, but when you look at the number of actual uh, prosecutions or
hmm.
enactments of those powers, often the organizations are woefully understaffed to implement those powers in truth. So it's not just about taking powers or not just about coming up with a brand new set of rules and regulations. It's about having enough wherewithal to implement them so that we do feel a sense that we've got a law enforcement that is on our side in this case,
Mm.
regulators that are able to enact the rules as they stand.
I mean, and isn't that part of the sort of the power asymmetry here? Like, you know, the regulatory or the legislative vehicles might exist, but we know that certainly in this country and in many others, the public purse is increasingly squeezed.
Yeah, that's the
You know,
truth.
we're struggling to maintain the infrastructure that you know the analog infrastructure that we have. Never mind enforce these rules and regulations in the era of AI.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So this is a question from Sarah, and it would be really remiss of me not to ask it. So Sarah, I'm really glad that you've posed this one. Sarah says there's a lot of talk of the AI bubble bursting. Do you think that this will be the case? We won't hold you to it.
Bubbles bursting. There is a natural life cycle, I think, to the enthusiasm that society and economy has for any new technology. And if you look back over decades, and I'm certainly afraid I can, you'll see alternately the bright new hope is some form of new advance in life science or some new advance in material science, or in this case, in computer science. Um, so the expectations are very large indeed. AI is delivering really substantive and extraordinary accomplishments from machine translation through to kind of detection of anomalies in images that might relate to kind of cancer, might relate to a whole range of health conditions we care about. So these are real advances. The bubble, though, people refer to this kind of the extraordinary amounts of money that are being invested in the picks and axes of picks and shovels of the AI revolution in terms of data centers, in terms of chips, in terms of all of that capability, energy to drive all of this. And valuations for some seem to be very, very out of line with what the returns might need to look like. Some are
Mm,
convinced those returns will follow. I think it would be surprising if there isn't going to be some market corrections at some point.
mm,
There will be new entrants. It'll be competitive. It's not as if the existing players are going to have everything their own way. It's hard to sometimes shift incumbents with the amount of power and resource they have. But again, look back just a little time and think how many of the companies now in this space did not exist. So you're likely to see a shakeout, and I'm not going to predict when and how because I mean that'd be great with hindsight. And you see these little kind of peaks and troughs in various share prices, and people say, "Is this kind of signal of things to come?" Um, I think it's likely that there is still some way to go in terms of the opportunity to put this technology to work. We might start to see disruptors where the costs and energetics of putting it to work aren't quite where everybody thinks they are at the moment. So the
mm,
commoditization, the white labeling, the kind of mass distribution of compute capability to the edge has always been something we've seen. So the fact that you now carry around on your smartphones a substantially capable AI chip, that's not going to stop. So
mhm,
yeah, we the bubble. I don't think it's not going to burst. Each time it has burst in the past, it was kind of a spiral of ascent that actually there were periods of rapid increase and then ceiling effects were reached. And there was
mm,
sometimes dips in valuations, but then inevitably things picked up because of just the rates and exponents of technological advance. So it's a really interesting moment, and I'd be surprised if there won't be some corrections. I'm
mhm.
not going to anticipate where. I'm not. I'm got. I'm not.
Don't make yourself a hostage to
No, no,
fortune.
I'm not Warren Buffett.
So I've got two questions that I'd really like to get to. They're quite different. Before I come to Aid's final question, you'll realise why I've saved his
Yeah.
question to the end. So, and these are really different. But if I give you them both, and then you can choose which one you give greater emphasis to. The first one is from John, and it's well, I would characterize it as quite a philosophical question, actually. So he says rogue models sounds just like humans with mental health issues. What read across or inspiration is there from human mental health treatments to the AI world? And I was thinking about sort of cognitive behavioral therapy and other kind of
Yeah.
treatments like that. So that's really interesting. Asking you to make another analogy, I guess. And then Tanya asks, she's from 360 Giving. It's important for me to say that because this relates to something she's experiencing. Can we have genuinely open data in the era of AI data aggressive models? At 360 Giving, we're struggling to retain our data as completely open for humans as the AI scrapers constantly risk bringing GrantNav, which is their tool, down so that isn't available to people. So they're really fighting day to day,
Yeah.
with this technically. So yeah, I wonder if you could answer those two for us, Nigel.
Well, I just take that question because I think it's really interesting. The extent to which our computing infrastructures, which are set up with reasonable expectations about, what comes to visit, what data is or isn't kind of harvested as a result. These are very aggressive harvesting practices that you can see, and the fact that we don't have any developed duty of care in this space is one of the kind of really surprising things about the evolution of our cyber infrastructure and cyberspace. And that when we pay attention to the physical environments in which we operate, we put in place as duties of care. There is some assumption about what is or not reasonable. And it seems to be that, and partly this is a failure also, I would say, in the way that we've gotten grips on as sets of collective nations around the challenge of malware, around the challenge of cybersecurity, is that effectively there's a 24/7 undeclared war on our respective infrastructures, denial of service attacks, da, 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 da. And in some senses, you move into the commercial space of, well, I'm just going to saturate your servers by kind of doing large amounts of non-discriminating harvesting. It's really tough. And I
Mm,
wonder why we're not thinking a little bit more imaginatively about how regulatory technology and innovation in this space, people say, oh, this will render innovation dead. It'll kill the kind of ability to assemble and manipulate. I think it's about fair use principles
mm,
that you would want to bake into some of your infrastructure. Now, this is, I think, something that's worthy of consideration. Um, I think it'd be a real shame if our really excellent sites that have been put up with public effort and under an assumption of a commons um, find themselves under huge technological, economic, and administrative duress because of these systems. So
mm,
I'd like to see a little bit more thought given to that.
mm-hmm.
The other question, just sorry, remind me, was
Yeah, so
oh,
John was asking about rogue models. The phrase
yeah.
rogue models
Oh
sounds
yes,
like
yes, the mental
humans with
health.
mental
Yeah,
health
yeah,
issues, and
yeah.
that really interesting question about
Yeah.
whether there's some read across from the human mental health sort of clinical area into the AI world.
Yeah, it's fascinating to imagine the Eliza of the 21st century interrogating its colleagues about their state of mind. I think it's an interesting analogy. Of course, imperfect in one sense, in that there is no constructed self in these systems that is undergoing cognitive dissonance. It's easy to kind of fall into the model. Oh, it's, this is kind of a schizophrenic ensemble of different personalities. You can take that so far, but of course, it is such a compression of so many elements. The way in which people are thinking about trying to tune and align these systems actually does make some appeal to ideas in, whether you can actually interrogate systematically and therapeutically, in a way that reveals the particular preferences or biases inherent in these systems that you would want to be able to assess the well-being of a system across this range of criteria is an interesting one. Of course, it is the stuff of
Mm.
science fiction classically. It's good old Hal became vaguely paranoid and in the original 2001, and not vaguely, directly.
Yeah.
So we would want to, I think thinking about so some people take the notion of well-being of these systems more very seriously, as you may know. Some companies are saying when we decommission these systems, we have to think about how we do that in a way that is, well, considered. At this point, I believe we're just switching them off, but that might be controversial in some quarters. The the extent to which we can help ourselves to ideas in therapy, self-improvement, diagnostics of various sorts that can reveal different pathologies, I think that is quite a fruitful way of thinking about this. I don't think
Yeah.
it's but the danger is we lurch into a form of language which accords them all sorts of states. The analogies only go so far. But I think, when we think about alignment, we would ideally like to hold these systems, as Roger and I say in our As If Human text, we say that, we want to hold them to the same standards we hold ourselves, and that probably ought to include notions of balance and perspective.
Yes, this is related actually. So I'm going to squeeze one more in. So I'm going to ask this question from Simon, and then I'm going to tag Aid's question on the end. So Simon asks, are there practices or aspects of being human that might be understood to be untouchable by generative AI and related technologies? Like, should there be some guardrails around certain things? I mean, I know that the whole debate around synthetic pornography is very live at the moment, and I wonder whether there are certain areas where it just shouldn't go. So there's that one, and then the final question for this afternoon. So Aid asked at the very beginning, which articles and books would you recommend for developing a solid understanding of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and deep learning? So the first question about human areas of humanity where AI shouldn't go, shouldn't live, and then your book list or list of papers recommendations to wrap us up.
Well, just on the question of where should AI not go. I mean, we do think about this. I think in terms of the AI safety summit's been the work there's been. Whatever your view on existential risks, there are applications in um, uh, having these systems very clearly and carefully delineated, not to be getting into bioweapons design, various other things. What nation states choose to do, they choose to do. But I do think we want to be quite thoughtful there, as you say, areas of uh, malfeasance, use of porn. I think we have to be quite thoughtful as we develop these systems, and undoubtedly we will, develop more and more of these synthetic avatars that, are in our lives. But how do we want to interact with them becomes really important. And again, this is something that Roger and I have written about, this idea of, should you be respectful or civil to an AI system? It's not a matter of whether it's sentient or self-aware. It's if you coarsen your interactions with these adaptive systems, you coarsen your interaction with actual human beings potentially, and we don't know how that transfer takes over. So the idea you can take everything out on your synthetic avatar, all of your worst kind of it doesn't sit well with me. So I would be concerned about that. The whole area I see some questions around the whole issue around uh, child-related applications, that particularly important moment when our children are developing, are forming their are being socialized, are forming their kind of understanding of the world. I think, again, this massive uncontrolled experiment of these systems into our lives We regulate transport, we regulate health. We know that AI won't just can't just be deployed into these systems without testing. In the social world we live, that's happening right now. And I think there is a general need to be vigilant on where those harms are. And if you see them, to get onto it and not keeping kicking cans down the road in quite infuriating way. So books.
Books, Nigel, your top three, four, maybe, if you dare.
Now that's a tough one. I mean, there are so many good resources now. I'm not going to kind of privilege one or indeed even my own in that regard. There are, and it depends where your interest is. The everybody kind of goes to the classic textbook, which is Stuart Russell and Peter Norvig, standard textbook for AI. There's a lot in that book that is about methods which are not modern machine learning. I mean, it's updated now to include the more recent developments as it should. But if you read Russell and Norvig, what you find out is just how deep and broad the range of methods are. And indeed, in many built systems, we're seeing an ensemble of these methods and techniques. I think that there's I will say that I think in terms of ethics and the challenges in how you think about interacting with these systems, I do think As If Human isn't a bad read.
Mm.
Roger and myself, I think that the papers you can go out and see just such a rich range of papers. I do think that I'm not going to promote one over another. Accessible books. I mean, Brian Christian wrote a very nice book on the alignment problem. It's a classic now, Machine Learning and Human Values. That was a good text. Yeah, but just go out there and use your favorite assistant to recommend you key papers. And there is variation. I mean, each model will give you a different characterization. Each angle of interest will intrigue you. For me, some of the most interesting papers are on the engineering, literally what it takes to build and manage systems that have thousands, tens of thousands of GPUs synchronized. It's not just the underlying AI algorithm that is the key to success with these systems. It's all the middleware software that keeps them running when various bits and pieces are falling over or how they intercommunicate. I found that engineering challenge very interesting. For others, it's the incorporation into our politics, into our economy that is absolutely compelling. And there's a diet out there of books now that's available for most. And yeah, that's it.
Yep.
I'm not going to recommend my favorite
Excellent.
reading list because I'll get it in the neck from colleagues who I don't.
There's always going to be somebody that you don't mention, but that was fantastic. And don't forget everyone as well that there's a lot of, if you're interested in the data aspects, the data centric aspects of AI, there's a
Yeah.
lot of content freely available on the
Okay, I
ODI's
know. Well, I will actually.
website.
I will call out my colleague Mike Wooldridge's book, "The Road to Conscious Machines." Is a good read at a general level. Yep.
Excellent. Brilliant. Nigel, thank you. That has been absolutely amazing. I want to thank the audience for being so engaged today and for all your
What a lot of
questions.
questions. Yeah.
Incredible. And I'm
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
sorry we
Yeah.
didn't
Yeah.
get to them all, but we'll have a think about how we can get to some more of them, whether that's another presentation in the new year or whether that's a written piece. We'll have a think about it. This will be going up on the ODI website. We will try and collate as many links to support the recommendations that Nigel has given and possibly post them on the page as well. Look out for our other webinars coming up. Our next one, I believe, is on diversity in technology. That's with Harriet Harman and our global head of policy, Resham Katecha, and the CEO of Tech She Can, Claire Thorne. That is coming up on the 18th, I think it is, of November, but check out the website and please do sign up for that one. But for now, Nigel, thank you very much
No,
indeed.
thank you. What a great set of questions. Been really nice talking with you, Emma. Okay.
Great to see you. Thanks,
Take care.
everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.